Hi, and welcome to the next episode of ID Cyber Sessions. I'm Alice, and this is Steve, and we're both Cyber Essentials Assessors at ID Cyber Solutions.
Today we have Scott joining us, and he is a CSOC Engineering Lead at National Gas. You have a very varied background, not just with National Gas, so would you want to tell me a little bit about your background and what your CV kind of looks like?
My CV's a mess. I, like many people, was told as a kid, you go to school, you go to university or college, you get a degree, and then you go and work in a good field, and that's your job for life. I did completely the opposite of that. I did go to university, but I ended up starting out in pharmaceutical IT, being a consultant there for about 2 years. Quit that job with nothing lined up and decided to float around, run my own business, try and do something different, and fell into every single security role that I've ever had since.
And when you speak about university, you didn't just do 4 years of a degree, did you? You had quite an unusual degree.
Yeah, so I did something called a sandwich degree. Now, I wasn't a particularly good student, so the 3-year degree ended up being a 4-year degree anyway because I had to reset quite a lot of university. But partway through my university, they still gave me the deal where I could actually go out into industry and work for a company to sort of at university you learn a lot of theory stuff. You learn a lot of the background stuff. But in practice, it's really, really hard to teach students how to do this in practice. So the University of Paisley at the time had this idea of a sandwich degree where you go out and work for the industry for about a year, and you do get graded. It's a module that you're graded on, and if you don't pass, you don't graduate. So I did that. I spent 2 years at university, resat a year in my spare time at nights and stuff, and then went out to work for the industry. Came back, realised that theory is theory and practice is vastly different.
So during that time when you were working in industry, I take it you built up lots of connections. Do you find that those connections that you built up during that time has helped you sort of move on in the industry?
Actually, interestingly enough, my placement was just with a small furniture company. It was more IT based. I was doing a lot of their web based stuff, so either running the servers, web dev, fixing stuff, even a little bit of web design. The connections I made there, yes, some of them have helped, but they haven't really impacted my security career. That came a little bit later. What was good though was having a grounding of varied people from various different industries, other web devs, for example, other server techs, other sysadmins, just being able to almost leech off them and try and understand more about the industry, more about IT in general, more about cyber in general. And I'll be honest, I didn't even realise cyber was a thing back then. Cybersecurity didn't really exist.
So if you were working in IT during your sandwich degree and then you went into pharmaceutical IT, how did you then end up in cyber?
Well, that's an interesting question. So again, it was kind of like when I was young, a kid, a teenager, playing around with computers. I never really, really thought that there was a job in technology. Like many of us didn't. It was a hobby. It was something you did. You were good with computers. You found it quite fun. You could mess around with computers. You didn't really think there was a job there. And I was surprised to learn, yes, there was a university degree for IT, and yes, you could actually end up in a job in computers and computing. That's awesome. Exact same situation happened when I was much older and realised, hey, wait a minute, this server needs patched and I could breach it really easily, or I could, bypass the firewall in this, or I could get around this credit card machine this way. So why don't we defend against it? Why don't we actually protect? And then found that, hey, wait a minute, actually there is a job there for this exact thing, and it's grown substantially for the last 10 or 15, 20 years.
And actually, so I know that a lot of your early work in security, you did actually look at credit cards and cloning cards, and you did a lot of that work on that for TV.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that and your kind of how did you end up in TV?
How I ended up in TV and how I ended up dealing with all the credit card stuff is a really interesting story. So I played in a band, like many of us do, with just a couple of mates. One of them worked for a TV studio, and they were filming this new show about various scams and frauds and all that kind of good stuff. And they had a consultant that was working for them. He was unfortunately ill, and the friend of mine phoned me up and said, hey, look, I know it's last minute notice, I know it's a bit weird, do you mind coming into the studio and just explaining some of this stuff? So I went in and took a satchel bag, a big satchel bag full of toys and card machines and anything I could find that I'd been playing with in the house and taken apart. And went in and dumped the bag in front of them and went, okay, this is how it all works and this is how it all goes together. And they immediately went, hey, do you want to actually kind of like, be a consultant for the TV show, not just a one-off? Do you want to actually consult on this entire series? And of course I said, absolutely yes. Found out later that the host of the show was someone I'd always looked up to. He'd been part of The Real Hustle TV show. And I remember watching that TV show growing up going, that's so cool, I kind of want to be like friends with this guy and I want to do all this stuff. And it transpired that I ended up doing it just because I brought in a satchel bag full of toys and impressed the right people in the room, basically.
So recently, we were all at a security conference, Le Tour de Hack in Edinburgh. You did a talk there, and you talked about saying yes. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you meant by that? Because obviously that incident where you said you could have went, actually, no, it's not for me, and everything would have fallen apart at that point. But you said yes, and obviously good things came of it. So do you want to talk about that?
Yes.
Good answer.
Yeah, no, I am a big fan of saying yes. I try something before you say no. For some of the students I speak to, it's always hey, look, I know public speaking you might think it's not your thing. You should try it at least once. You should try, something you've never considered before as a career path, or playing with Python instead of PHP or whatever it may be. Say yes and see whether you can do it. I mean, don't say yes to something and then it's actually dangerous you working in that field, or I'm a trained surgeon when you're actually not. But taking a chance and taking a risk, I hate this idea that you need to be stuck in a box and you need to be super qualified or have all the degrees and certs to be able to just write a line of code. That doesn't make sense to me, because if we think back 20 plus years ago, a little bit more now, when we were all dumb teenagers just playing around on our computers, learning stuff, none of us were qualified. We were writing scripts left, right and centre. We were playing around with MSN Messenger, trying to break it and make it do cool stuff so you can, joke your mates. Just say yes and see what you can do. And honestly, a lot of the opportunities I've had have come from saying yes to people going, yeah, I don't know it, but I'll go and find out, and then we'll see what we can do. Television, for example. I turned up just saying, yeah, sure, I'll come along with a big bag of toys and see what happens, and ended up with a career in TV, which was bizarre.
And it's interesting as well, because you've already said that you struggled at university with the kind of very kind of rigid structure and the exams and things like that, and now you're saying as well that you don't really do certs, do you?
No, I'm quite notorious for not doing certifications unless there's a practical element. If it's a pure practical certification, I'm quite happy to do it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because I think there's been a move recently. So obviously you've been doing your CEH, you've just passed it, and you're moving on to the very kind of lab focused thing, and a lot of the courses now are very kind of practical. So what's your view on certs when they've got that very kind of practical hands-on element, which differs so much from your university experience?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of theory, just pure theory, because theory change, it goes out of date. Even the certs that we're doing now, that you hear about that are practical focused, there's a date and time, they are dated. The minute that they are produced so that everybody's looked at them and went, yep, this is a valuable thing, all of a sudden next week there's a patch for this, there's an update to something, everything goes out the window. The practical stuff, you can get away with it a little bit more, but when it comes to theory, this stuff can be 5, 10, 15 years out of date, which bothers me. So in terms of the practical certs, or any certs that I would be keen on taking, depends on the course content, whether or not it has a lot of practical elements. If there is theory there, it needs to be theory, not theory from 5, 10 years ago that is completely wrong. Also depends on the instructor. If I have someone that is actually going to encourage me and understand that everybody in the room isn't the same mold, that's a different thing. If the instructor can make real world examples, that's awesome, because then I can see, okay, in theory this, but here's a real world example and we're going to do it in a lab now. That's perfect for me.
Which is actually, it's awesome. So I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch, but it was something that that really stuck out to me when I did the CCT, was that my instructor, who was Carrie, like frequently, even when we were just doing the theory, he would be pulling it back to the real world examples. And I guess you're seeing a lot of that stuff, like in your day job, basically. You're seeing it's those real world examples that you can kind of tie back to what you've previously heard about.
Yeah, real world examples are so important. I've dealt with so many, kind of graduates in InfoSec coming into various companies I've worked for, and trying to tie it back to why does this matter? You need a real world example. You need to understand. It's all very well and good we sit there and say, if we don't do this, the bad guys win. But who are the bad guys, and why does it matter? And how does this impact someone? Why does it matter that I need to cycle my password or not cycle my password? For example, why does it ultimately matter? Well, here's an example. Here's a real world example that I've been involved in. Oh, right, okay, I get it. That changes everything. It gives them context. Context is king.
Yeah, I definitely found that when I was doing the CH, it was all about getting context to that thing you're learning. Because without that context, it's like, why am I doing it? Why am I just, why that tool for that thing? And well, that's why, because there's this story around it, and this happened here and this happened there, and that's why you use those tools. So I found that really interesting. So when it comes, again, I'm coming back to the social side of things, because me myself have experienced that over the past month, where getting out into the cybersecurity community has been massive for me in the last month. I've built a massive circle of people within security, but also they're now friends as well, which is really important. And it was yourself that you and Alice that both kind of brought me into that. Do you want to talk about the importance of that? I mean, obviously I've got examples, but at the same time, your example of why that's so important.
Sure. We wouldn't be sitting here just now if it wasn't important. So I met, for example, Carrie, who works for ID Cyber many years ago. We were lecturing together on the Cyber First programme. And that's a lot of my security career is built from networking. It's built from speaking to people and realising they're good humans. I know vaguely what they do for a living, and going, I kind of want to collaborate with you on this. Or, I have this thing, I'm not really sure what it is. Can you help? Can you maybe give advice? Or even if it's something not tech related, something non-cyber related, hey, have you got a cocktail recipe? Something like that. And all of a sudden you've built up this network, and it's not fake and it's not false. It's actual, you mentioned friends. It's genuine friends, genuine friendships, so that when the ultimately bad thing happens at your company, or you have a client that has a bad day, you know that you have a ring of friends that you can just phone up and go, we don't know what we're dealing with here. Actually, we don't want to deal with this. This is something that's, it's completely outside our remit. So for example, if in absolute hypotheticals, you had a client that was hit by ransomware and they decided to pay the ransom because they felt it was the only course of action they could take, that might be something that ethically I don't really want to get involved in, but I know there's a few other people that will go, ethically it's a problem, but I'm happy to help you out here to help the customer out, because see, at the end of the day, and you mentioned friends, we're all in it for the same reason. We're all on the defence side. It doesn't matter whether you're red team, blue team, purple team, doesn't matter what colour of team you are, even if you're a pen tester, we're all on the same side to try and make the world a safer place, have fun. And some of the stuff that we do is, if you actually look at it, if we make mistakes in our job, that could have serious real world implications and real world consequences. If we don't have friends that we can rely on, if we don't have a laugh and go and do the social aspect, it suddenly becomes very, very taxing and draining. And it's really, really hard to, when you go to a pub and have a drink with a surgeon, for example, say, my job is just as stressful as yours. They don't have the context. We do. So it's nice to have friends that you can rely on.
Really interesting. Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's really made a massive difference to how I view the cybersecurity community as a whole now. It's I just thought it was we're just in a room doing tickets and stuff, but now it's just this whole, I've never realised all the different aspects of security there is out there, because everyone's doing totally different things that I didn't know existed. So It's been really beneficial.
And actually that ties in quite nicely to, because I know you describe yourself as a cyber generalist, and I think that ties in very well to your networking, because a lot of the jobs that you've had, you've only really heard about through your network, and your network basically going, oh, maybe Scott has some insights on this. So even though you haven't had a strong background in the SOC, for example, you still ended up working on one. So I wondered if you could kind of talk about that kind of relationship between networking, cyber generalism, and just kind of where that's taken you.
Sure. I'll use the SOC example because it's perfect. I went to work for a SOC as a senior analyst, and I walked in the door and did the analyst job for about 2 months. I know it annoyed a lot of the analysts because I'm being quote unquote paid as a senior analyst just to do tickets, just to ticket munch like the rest of them. But what it did do was it gave me an insight into how a SOC actually works inside. And I could apply my knowledge of web dev, because I'd done the web development piece, I'd done the server tech bit, I'd been a bit of a sysadmin, a bad one, but a relatively decent one. I still did it. And I could apply all this knowledge, kind of like Slumdog Millionaire, if you've ever seen that film, where, the reason why he won the millions on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was because of his life experiences. It was because of all the things that he basically found, or situations that he didn't realise he'd been involved in, was actually a question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. That's the exact same thing. I see it's no different, where I played around with the server when I was a kid, I broke it, I fixed it, I learned how not to do that again. And again, I'll come back to some of the graduates, some of the really, really good graduates we brought on board. I'd give them tasks over the weekend or whenever they had free time to go, hey, go and break the thing, figure out how you fix it, because see the next ticket, you're going to understand how that's built from the ground up. And that was my that's why cyber journalism to me, and I've had conversations with other cyber journalists that they feel the same, where we've broken enough stuff through our teens and early 20s and stuff that we know how this stuff is built from the ground up. We've taken stuff apart and didn't know it. You always get 6 bolts left over. The digital equivalent of that. We've always done that, so we now know exactly how this thing's put together, so we know exactly why this is important, or we can make a decision in 10 seconds or less going, that ticket that's come in is critical. It's actually fine because, I've built these things in the past, so we're not wasting time looking at the wrong stuff, we're looking at the right stuff.
So in terms of your cyber generalism, would you say, are there any aspects that you haven't worked in? Because I know you've done web, you've done SOC, you're currently doing this kind of entire kind of critical national infrastructure security setting from an engineering point of view. Are there any aspects you haven't really worked in?
Yeah, I'm reverse engineering. Absolutely hate it. Cannot. Every single CTF we play, there's a couple of us in a Discord server that we just play CTFs all the time, and when it comes to the reverse engineering or anything DFIR, nah, not for me. I've tried. I've watched malware tech's videos on, hey, here's how we pull apart a binary, and I watch the video and go, oh, this is really great, and then try it myself and get bored within 5 seconds or less. I can't do it. I just can't. So it's not something that's up my street. I can advise on it. So I have been in a room where I've been asked to, rip apart a binary and stuff, and I've given it to someone else and spoken about what they're doing. So I can be the translator. But I just, no matter how hard I try, just can't do it.
But then I guess that's where your network comes in, because you know people that can. So if you ever get approached with it, you just go, I can't, but I know a guy.
Yeah.
I know someone.
That's absolutely right. It's building up that network so that I could, when I quit the pharmaceutical job, I basically ran my own business. I was a self-employed consultant and technically still am, for about 14 years now. And having a network of people that I could rely on going, this is outside my skill set, I don't want to take it on, there's not enough money in it, or there's too much money in it, there's too much pressure riding on this, I could give it to someone else, know that they would do a good job, trust the person, trust the results that they're going to come out with, and back them up if they ever needed it, because I knew that the same would happen in reverse. We all have weaknesses and strengths. My job here is just to be another jigsaw piece into someone else, another consultant, to go, okay, I can't deal with this, but I can deal with that, let's swap jobs and we can help each other.
So from your point of view right now, so what you're seeing in the industry, where do you see cybersecurity moving to in the next 5 years, 5 years maybe?
I have no idea. And that's awesome. I have no idea, and I'm not going to make any estimations or assumptions or anything. That's fine, because I don't care about the industry. I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. I don't care about the industry. I care about the people. Because as long as the people stay, and the good people stay, and we're not unlike any other industry. There are, people that are quote-unquote charlatans. We do have people that are definitely suffering from imposter syndrome, but they're good at the job. And then we have people at the opposite end of the scale that think they know what they're doing, and they genuinely don't, and they're dangerous. That's a very, very small minority, but it's the people. The people drive it forward. I don't care about the technology. I don't care what we're defending. I don't care what server stack it's running on. I don't care what is going on in the background. I don't care about the theory. I just care about the people. Because if you break cybersecurity down into its base, grassroots, it's people at its core. You're not protecting a server. You're protecting people. You're protecting data. What is that data? People's data. So at the end of the day, I don't care where it goes. I'm along for the ride. I am quite happy. I don't like the idea of having a 5-year plan. I just like floating around and doing my own thing. It seems to have worked out pretty well. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it completely blows up in my face, and that's fine. I will fix it and move on, and then I've got another thing that maybe in 5 years' time someone turns around and says, "Oh, we got this ticket in and we don't know where it is." I'm like, "Oh, that blew up in my face 5 years ago, and
This
I can
is
fix
why.
it."
Yeah.
I'm just along for the ride.
And then when you break it down to that, it's people protecting people, which then really brings out the ethical questions. And you've already touched on it a little bit, but I know you have I know you have very strong ethics when it comes to your work. And yeah, I guess if you could you speak on that a bit?
I know exactly what you're referring to. 2015, I was playing around with some mobile phone spam call type detection security stuff. Mobile phones are so incredibly interesting to play with, especially SS7. That's an incredible industry just to even look at. And I decided to make a nuisance call busting app. So it was the idea behind it was I was just fed up getting nuisance calls. Started playing around with stuff, made this app, released it on the iPhone, the App Store, sorry, and it did pretty damn good. I mean, it did okay for at least 6 months. It did so well. I ended up at the top of the business store, which I thought was awesome. I just thought it was just so cool. I sold the app for about 49 pence a go. It was a one-off fee, and the idea was just to kind of curb nuisance calls. Out of nowhere one day I got an email from a guy saying, "Hey, have you ever thought about selling your product?" And I thought, yeah, I'm always open to offers. Sure. And the offer that came back was substantially bigger than what I'd even imagined. So you got to remember the timing of this. So the timing of this, I wasn't earning a stable salary, put it that way. I wasn't earning as much as I could have. I could have gone and been a sysadmin. I could have gone and done security, but I wanted to work for myself and do some good stuff and learn. So we weren't earning a particularly massive amount of money. We had a lot of outgoings, not a lot of income, so it was like scraping the barrel every single month. And this individual contacted me on email and said, "Hey, do you ever think about selling your app?" Sure. They said, "What's the offer?" And we chatted back and forward, and he eventually came back with an offer of $3 million per year for the next 5 or 10 years, plus an initial fee, plus a percentage cut of every app sale, and all this kind of crazy stuff. And I did kind of almost fall off my chair. There was something about it though that just didn't sit well with me. There was something I was going, nah, this is not quite right, and I need to dig out. And he gave me all his bank statements. The guy was American, and he gave me all these tax records and stuff, so I could check. And the guy was a legitimate individual and legitimately had this money. But after digging and digging and digging, he eventually fessed up what he planned to do. Now, my app worked on the premise of you report a number, it's added into the pool. There was a bit of kind of machine learning going on, actual machine learning, not just somebody sitting at the other end looking, going, "Oh yeah, that looks dodgy," to add this into a big block list. Now, the way the app functioned as well was after a certain period of time, the number would be removed from the block list. This is something that a lot of spam call solutions often forget about, is the number can be recycled. It's like an IP address, recycles. And spammers don't care about holding on to the number. Once it's blocked somewhere, they'll move on. So I don't want someone to go into a phone shop, pick up a phone, that number's been recycled and it's blocked by half the country. This guy though decided to distribute, or his plan was to distribute the application through all of North America for free for 6 months, get every single business in the North American region to subscribe to the app for free, and then what you would do is block every single business, including your mom and pop shops right up to your big corporate institutes, block them and then charge them a fee for unblocking. So that to me felt like extortion. And this is why the offer was so large. $3 million is nothing compared to if you charge a business $30 per month to be unblocked. Times that by the number of businesses in the US, that's a lot. So I went back to the guy and said, "Sadly, decline your offer." I had to cancel the Ferrari that was in back order. I had to cancel the Lamborghini. I had to cancel the house. No, I went back and said, "Look, I'm really sorry. Big bag of cash, not my bag. I'm really sorry." I did tell a few friends, worked for policing at the time as well, as a kind of private consultant. like Sherlock. And I told some of them, and the response was, "You're an idiot. You should take the money." But ethics and morals for me are a big thing. Once you give them up, you can't get them back. So even though we were scraping the bottom of the barrel every month, for me it was like, this will be a good story one day, and I get to tell you it. But rather that.
And you can sleep at night as well.
I can sleep at night. It was difficult, I have to
Yeah.
say. $3 million per year for 5 years, that
So
could
what-
really set you up.
Yeah.
But I decided against it, and I'm kind of glad because it's given me what I'm doing now I wouldn't be doing if I'd taken that offer.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad, and it's a good story, and everybody I tell calls me an idiot, and that's fine. I can live with being an idiot.
Yeah. I think I would, to be honest, I'm totally agree with what you said there. So I would probably have hated myself for it, but yeah, I would have probably done exactly the same thing. You mentioned briefly about imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know that in this industry, it's there. We've all experienced it. Have you get any sort of experience of yourself where you've been in that position, or what you would advise people who are potentially in that position just now?
Yeah, I suffer from imposter syndrome every single day. When I go to work, I wonder why am I here? Like, why is it me?
Yeah.
You know, because some of the people that I deal with, they're way more technically competent. They're way more technically smart. They know more stuff than I'll ever forget. Like, they just are awesome. Imposter syndrome is a big deal, and specifically for our industry. Everybody thinks that they're rubbish at their job, they're not good enough, they can do better. That's good because it spurs them along, but it's also a negative. You know, it's not a, hey, I can do better for myself. It's also a, they wake up in the morning and go, I don't really know what I'm doing. But that's the secret, and that's the kind of cool thing. It's none of us really do. None of us really know what we're doing. I regularly say to people, you know, when they're like, oh, but you're sorted, you know, you've got this job and you're happy. And I'm like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up still. I really don't. And I don't know what I'm capable of doing. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next year. I don't know what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. Imposter syndrome is a big... It's a negative. We need to get rid of the imposter syndrome. But I don't have any advice because I suffer from it every single day. And all of our friends do. Everybody I speak to in the industry suffers from some degree of imposter syndrome. Even the most charismatic and extroverted person you'll meet in InfoSec will suffer massively from imposter syndrome. I think the best thing to do is rely on your network, rely on the friends, and go, hey, I'm struggling to be today, and they can go, hey, no, look, you've done all this cool stuff. That's awesome, and only you could have done that in that order or that way, and that kind of helps. Also strokes your ego a wee bit, so it's nice.
So it's kind of embrace it in a sense and use it to your advantage in the sense that it should sort of spur you on to, okay, you don't know it today, but you might learn it tomorrow, and that should sort of spur you on.
Yeah,
keep you going.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think as well that if you have imposter syndrome, it's normally a sign that you care as well, which is always a positive.
Yeah, no, I believe that as well. People that show up and you know, there's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. People that show up and go, I know this thing and I'm going to do it really, really well. It's very different to if someone doesn't have imposter syndrome, and if anybody doesn't have imposter syndrome, that's fine too, if you're good at what you can do. And again, confidence versus arrogance. But my worry is, the arrogance factor coming in. So if you don't have someone kind of keeping you grounded almost and going, hey, no, actually, hang on, come on, pull it back a wee bit, that can really upset you. And then you start this kind of cyclical, well, I don't feel like an imposter today, so does that mean I'm being arrogant? And then you suddenly get imposter syndrome, and then it just kind of goes around in a big circle. I think it's good though, because it grounds you. You've got friends around you that can go, hey, no, actually, you do know what you're doing here, or no, you are a mediocre engineer, it's okay. It's nice to have that, grounding.
So I've seen that you've actually had some experience working alongside the police. Would you like to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so back in, I would say probably about 2014, I was contacted by City of London Police, just asking me a whole bunch of questions, saying, hey, we have this thing, we don't know what it is, we've seen you around, you've been involved in, the counter fraud and counter scam stuff for a couple of years, can you just help? And that was like a lifeline, because my experience with policing when I was a teenager, especially when it comes to cyber, is very much like all of our experiences with anybody that grew up around computers and was into that stuff. the police was always, it just felt as if they were quite far behind. They didn't really care. They didn't really understand. And now looking back on it, they just didn't understand tech, and that's fine. And I saw an opportunity in 2014 to go and fix that, almost go and help police and help the public effectively through the police by training them and teaching them and helping them out. And I started this crazy. It's still going to this day. Started this crazy idea of keeping in touch with many police forces up and down the UK, even some abroad, to help out where I could. And I believe in that mission so much. A friend of mine actually contacted me and said, "Hey, do you want to fix policing from the inside for a wee bit?" I tried that. It was quite nice being able to pull a whole bunch of hackers into a police station every so often and get them to do hackathons. We hacked ANPR cameras, we did a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll always remember that the police showed up in full uniform on the first day. We had chief inspectors out with a shirt and tie on, and then we all turned up in the hoodies and we were eating pizza and stuff in this crazy training room. And then day two, the police suddenly turned up in hoodies and jeans. And it was almost like, oh, okay, you're understanding our culture a wee bit more now. And that to me was just perfect. I don't care about what we were doing. I don't care about the hackathon. The hackathon was awesome. We did some really cool stuff. I just supervised. Everybody else did some cool stuff. But the translation there, all of a sudden you had two groups that were normally enemies in the same room, bonding over a slice of pizza, basically wearing the same clothes. I'll never forget, there was a moment where we had a chief constable standing there in a hoodie and jeans, and because once you wear a hoodie, that means you're a hacker. Standing there in a hoodie and jeans and speaking to this very nervy individual in InfoSec, and they were having this good chat. And I remember the individual kept saying, "Yeah, I really don't like the police. It's not my bag." And the response came back going, "But you're in a police station doing a hackathon." And they said, "Yeah, but a lot of my friends came along and wanted to do some cool stuff, so I thought I'd come along, and it's actually been okay." And they paused for a second, turned around to the other individual and said, "So what is it you do?" And that's when the guy introduced himself as, "Hi, I'm the chief constable of this region that we're in." And it was this amazing moment where for 20 minutes they both put their jobs aside, they both put their predispositions aside, they put their preconceived notions of us versus them aside, and they were just two guys having a chat, trying to make the world a safer place. And that's what I always wanted to do, was just bring these two groups together, however I could do it, even in a small way, even if it's just one detective inspector I can pull in and go, "Hey, see that thing you're looking at? You actually kind of want to look this way, or you want to look at this instead." And I've been trying to do that ever since, and I think I made a little bit of progress, I hope.
And it just comes back to everything you've been saying about networking, and it's identifying different people's skill sets and personalities and just helping them identify that in each other and work together for, as you say, the greater good.
The greater good. I like being a translator though. I love that, and I think it's part of my extroverted personality. I like socialization. I like socializing with people. I like people. And I know a lot of people that work in our industry don't, and they like being quite introverted and stay in the room with the hood up and the blinds closed and dark room and typing away. As long as they're not hacking the police, it's fine. But no, I like being the translator. I like being that conduit because, again, using the police as an example because it's a perfect one, is you have two groups of people that speak two different languages. You look at anything the police will produce, or if you speak to an officer, even if you're pulled over just random spot checking the roads, they will speak to you very direct and matter of fact. Our community will take that as an offence, especially if it's about something they know. So they'll all of a sudden be at a state of almost like they'll be standoffish with one another when actually the two of them are working for the same goal. So I like being that conduit and going, I can take the flak. My skin is very thick. Trust me. Been in enough fights on Twitter that my skin is really, really thick. That I can take the heat from both sides going, yeah, but he turned up wearing a hoodie and she said this and I don't like the language. I don't like the fact that they're covered in tattoos. Well, guess what? Who cares? Okay, I'll forget telling that. I'll push that over there and we'll get people in the room that need to speak about the thing, whatever the thing may be. You need an expert that can tell you about VoIP systems. I have the best guy on the planet. Here's two people that are going to actually make the world a safer place.
And you know that those are both good guys as well.
Well, that's the thing. They're just two people that have the same goal that just ended up 2 different careers, following 2 different paths. There's no difference to them. And the way I see it is it's basically community policing. It's the exact same stuff that we did in the 80s and 90s when cops started going around communities, around local neighbourhoods, going, hey, have you thought about setting up a neighbourhood watch? Hey, have you thought about locking your car doors? Hey, by the way, your keys are still in the front door. Oh, by the way, your window's open and you've left for a week. That stuff. It's the exact same, but it's just digital. I love doing it.
In fact, you've done that as well. You identified a police force website that was open, so you contacted them and they were so grateful and they fixed it instantly.
Yeah, so that one was very interesting to me because that was at the start of my whole conversations with the police. I had contact with the City of London, but I hadn't had contact with all the other forces that are up and down the UK at this point. And my last interaction with policing trying to report a vulnerability was I ended up with 2 police at the door because they just didn't understand what I was trying to report. So when I spoke to them on the phone, I said, hey, look, there's this big phishing campaign. They're dumping all the details publicly. Stupidly said on the phone, I have a copy of all this if you ever need it for evidence. So the call handler on the phone said, oh, is that right? Tell me more. And stupid me, I was like, yeah, sure, I can tell you all the information. What she heard on the phone, and absolutely no malice towards her at all because they didn't understand technology at this point. This was a fair number of years ago. All she heard on the phone was, hi, I have hundreds of thousands of people's private information contrary to the Data Protection Act. Here is my home address and my phone number. I will be home between 9 and 5. Like, that's all she heard. And she processed it. And I remember the 2 officers came out and they had a good chuckle and said, look, delete the information. That's fine. We'll report it to high tech crimes at the time and then they'll deal with it. So this is about 10, 15 years later. I contacted this police force, as you mentioned, and said, hey, by the way, just to let you know, you have a serious vulnerability here. And I remember being very guarded when I phoned them up. I phoned from a withheld number, not that that would change anything. I phoned from a withheld number, only gave them my first name. I didn't really tell them a lot about myself. And I remember the person I spoke to said a few things. You'll notice this if you're at a pub and you start speaking to someone and they say, oh, I work in IT. And you start asking a little bit more questions. You're like, no, you're cyber. Oh, right, okay. And then they open up. This guy did the same thing to me, and we started chatting, and he was like, yeah, we ran this particular vulnerability scanner against it, and it came back screaming. Like, okay, why were you running a vulnerability scanner? So now I was interrogating the police. Why are we running a vulnerability scanner? Do you have permission? It was like, yeah, this is what we do. I was like, what do you mean this is what we do? Yeah, we do this. We have a unit that's dedicated to this. All of a sudden I was like, oh, I want to be your friend, because this is really cool. 15 years ago, you didn't understand what a phishing campaign was. Well, call handlers didn't. Now you're running, vulnerability scans. This is awesome. We got it shut down within about a day. Everything was fed back. I got a really nice thank you, which honestly, that's all I wanted. It wasn't public. That's fine. I got a private thank you, and I had a new contact within policing that knew what they were talking about within a certain force area, but I knew I could phone them up and say, hey, by the way, we found this other thing in this other force website. You might want to look at it. And I knew that I wouldn't have 2 officers at my parents' house again, basically, which was always fun to explain to Mum. But yeah.
So during these cyber sessions, we like to ask people if there's like a podcast or a book or something, not necessarily technical either. It's just, is there something in your life that's sort of affected your life in a positive way that you could recommend to our viewers?
Yeah, Twitter. I don't read. I'm pretty notorious for not reading. I don't read books. We have thousands of books at home, and I think I own about 4 of them. I've written bits of things to go into other people's books. I've had kind of really nice acknowledgements dedicated to me, and they've sent me a copy, and then I've just never read it. Sorry, really sorry, but I don't read books. I find it really, really hard to physically read. Comic books I'm fine with. I remember back in the day when I was a kid, I really, really struggled reading. But even comic books, I'll read maybe halfway through and then put it down, save it for later and forget, and it's 2 years later. But that's fine. I basically eat news for a living. I eat news on websites and stuff. I will eat Twitter daily. That's still reading. I do listen to podcasts though, so plus one. Two podcasts that I absolutely adore. One is Darknet Diaries, obviously. I think that's just wonderful. It's great to listen to stories of people you know, but with just the way it's produced, it's really, really nice. It's a nice telling. It's not just you're down the pub, it's just really, really nicely produced. Jack has a fantastic voice. I love the way he goes in and out of stuff. It's brilliant. And it's nice to hear like a few people that I've drank with in the pub being on the podcast as well, and that's not me going, ooh, I'm friends with these people. It's just more like that's how close knit the community is. You can just go to the pub with these people. The other one that I really like, it's a podcast from Jason Scott. It's called Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. It's a really, really good podcast. Jason Scott is fantastic. I really, really like the guy. He's an internet historian, basically, first and foremost. He's very well known for being very loud and flamboyant at DEF CON. He did the DEF CON documentary, it was really cool. And I love the podcast because he's talking about history, he's talking about stuff that we grew up with, and, like just really, really niche background information that you wouldn't find anywhere else. There's something about the podcast that I absolutely adore. But yeah, find whatever works for you.
That's a new one for me, so I need to be having a listen. But yeah, Darknet is a staple for anyone in the industry. I think even not, because the stories are incredible, even if you're not technical. It's great. Andy's back again because he took a good few months off, which is it's good to see that he's back again.
Well, I think that's all we've got time for. So thank you so much again for coming in to talk with us. And if you're interested in finding out any particular ways that we can help you, then please check out our website, idcybersolutions.com.